Markets hope for a rebound in US hiring after last month's disastrous figures. Plus, fears for Switzerland's role as a business haven as it votes on curbing the number of EU workers it lets in. Hello there, a very warm welcome to you. This is World Business Report with me, Alice Baxter. Also coming up for you in the programme, US markets notch up their biggest day of gains this year. We'll see if that optimism is carrying through into Asia. But first this hour, we start in the United States, where global markets will be focused this Friday on the health of the world's biggest economy and specifically the recovery in the labour market. In just a few hours from now, we'll get jobs figures for January, and the hope is that they will show something of a rebound from the last set of numbers, which were nothing short of disastrous, let's be honest. Last month, we learned that US employers created just 74,000 jobs in December. That was the worst payroll data for almost 3 years. So, was it a blip caused by the extreme cold weather in the US or a sign of a sharp slowdown in the economy? Well, today we'll find out. Economists are expecting a much healthier 185,000 new jobs in January. That would keep the unemployment rate at its 5-year low of 6.7%. But even with unemployment coming down, there's another big concern: wages. Many working Americans have seen their pay stagnate for years, putting severe pressure on their spending power. Michelle Fleury reports now from New York.
A majority of US workers have experienced a decade of flat wages. Research shows the median weekly wage in 2012 was $768. That's the same as 12 years earlier when adjusted for inflation. And the situation was made worse by the recession 5 years ago, when wages fell despite a rise in productivity.
New York City Transit Authority, how may I help you?
For Teresa Green, a New York subway system station agent, this pattern of flat wages has left her in a financially vulnerable position. 25
years ago when I first started, the paychecks were good, the raises were good. I had 4 young children then, and I was able to survive. And my 2 children went to college, and I didn't have any issues with trying to make ends meet. And now it's like I'm alone. Well, my children are grown, and it's hard just for me to survive.
In a country where consumer spending accounts for 2/3 of all economic activity, it sheds some light on why the recovery has been so lackluster.
The very, very slow growth in real earnings of typical American workers is slowing their demand for goods and services. And that, in turn, is slowing the growth of the U.S. economy. It's keeping it more moderate than it has been in past economic recoveries.
Most people agree that recovery is underway.
Over the last year, the unemployment rate has been falling. But for far too many Americans, the job market is still too weak, which they see through the slow pace of hiring and stagnant wages, and which prevents them from sharing in any sense of a wider prosperity. Michelle Fleury, BBC News in New York.
Well, as we've been saying, investors around the world are waiting for those US employment figures due at 8:30 Washington time or 13:30 GMT time. Let's cross over now to Sharanjit Lal, who's in Singapore, to see how Asian markets are faring in anticipation of those numbers. Sharanjit, how are they doing?
Well, they're doing relatively well, Alice. In fact, as you say, many here as well keeping a very keen watch for that employment report later today for clues on whether the world's largest economy is out of the woods. But before those figures, of course, there was the release of that better than estimated US jobless claims. And of course, we saw a very strong ending on Wall Street too, which also helped lift most Asian markets. They're all rebounding from the rout they experienced earlier this week, and the 5-month lows hit yesterday. For instance, instance, over in Japan, we're seeing shares of Sony rising. This in spite of the $1 billion loss it forecast yesterday when it posted its earnings. And that's after the electronics giant said it was cutting some 5,000 jobs. It's also exiting its very stagnant PC market this year as well. So investors are essentially reckoning that that aggressive restructuring plan may offset the impact of the forecast net loss of $1.08 billion. In fact, it was for the full year to March. Over in Australia, for instance, we're seeing gains too, and that's after the nation's central bank raised its forecast for economic growth and inflation for this year. The central bank also saying that rates were likely to remain at 2.5% for a while. But of course, I should say that while most Asian bourses were up, there was the exception of China's markets that have reopened today after the Lunar New Year holiday. And we saw the Shanghai Composite Index falling following news that growth in the Chinese services industry was slowing. So keeping an eye on that.
OK, Sharonjit, many thanks. Sharonjit Lell there for us live in Singapore, keeping a close eye on many stocks for us, including Sony. Very interesting what you have to say on that. Let's move over to Switzerland now, where immigration has long been a controversial and an emotive issue. This behind me, for example, is a poster from the right-wing Swiss People's Party back in 2008. Well, on Sunday, the Swiss hold a referendum on whether to impose quotas on immigrants from the EU, as it already does on non-EU immigrants. Well, the twist is that it's particularly aimed at well-educated, highly skilled workers who are blamed for pushing up house prices and taking the best jobs from locals. Well, the vote threatens to damage Switzerland's reputation as a business-friendly haven and has its many multinational firms worried. Well, let's talk now to Yves Nedegger, a member of parliament for the Swiss National Party. Sadly, I've just been told that we've lost the line with that member of parliament. Hopefully we can speak to him a little bit later in the programme, but we'll have to leave it for now. OK, let's quickly look at a little bit of other news for you now this Friday instead. A former portfolio manager at SAC Capital Advisors hedge fund has been found guilty of conspiracy and securities fraud in what prosecutors called the most lucrative insider trading scheme in US history. Matthew Martoma could face up to 45 years in jail for acquiring secret information about drug trials that left his firm $275 million better off. He's the 8th current or former employee of SAC, owned by Wall Street billionaire Stephen A. Cohen, to be convicted of insider trading. Steel giant ArcelorMittal is expected to report a jump in fourth quarter profits. Analysts think that they could be up some 30% on the same period last year. The world's biggest steelmaker, seen as an indicator really of global economic activity, said in November that it was, quote, turning the corner. Investors will be looking for its outlook on the rest of the year and possible effects of the turmoil in emerging markets. OK, we obviously heard what Sharonjit had to say about how Asian stocks were faring. Of course, all eyes on the US at the moment as we wait for those key job numbers for January to come out soon. Interesting also, of course, what she was saying about the goings-on at Sony, particularly how robust investors seem to think that the stock is there. Let's have a quick look to see how Asian markets are faring at the moment. As we can see, the Nikkei in Tokyo up nearly 2%. A similarly positive view across the rest of the region as well. Those gains following a similar upward trends that we saw on Wall Street, of course, also in anticipation of those more positive US jobs reports that we're expecting for January, of course, following the slightly disastrous jobs report that we saw for the last period. But that is the view at the moment. Let's have a quick look, if we can, at how US markets looked at the close as well. I'm afraid we can't seem to bring you those numbers as well, but as I said, that they did have a positive outlook as well in anticipation of those job numbers. There we go. That's the view across the states at the close there as well. The Dow Jones up 1.22%, the S&P 500 up 1.24%, and similarly the Nasdaq up over 1% as well. OK, from me and the team, that's all for this hour. Do stay with us here on BBC World News, though. I'll be back in just a moment with Geeta for a look at the international press. We'll be joined by Jeremy Stretch, so do stay with us for that.